Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Park and Rec Committee meeting for Monday, March 18th, the regular meeting. Would like to call the meeting to order. We'll have a roll call vote.
I'm
A roll call vote, roll call. We don't have to vote on the roll call.
Mary Larson.
Dawn Wittenberg.
Greg McCurry.
Larry Schultz.
Amanda Cahill.
Terry Cope.
I'm staff, Alyssa Swanson.
Okay, welcome everyone. First on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the last couple of meetings that we had, the January 17th and the February 21st minutes. Does anybody have any questions on either of those? Any corrections, additions?
I just had one comment for the Feb 21 minutes. There was just one thing in there that said worth, WORTH, instead of we will continue our work with Mr. McGuire. So not a big deal, but just wanted to note it.
Okay,
We'll get that corrected before it gets officially published. And I do want to note, even though we didn't have a quorum for that meeting, for public transparency, it's good to still take minutes and at least have those formally adopted, just so then the public knows what transpired without watching that video.
Great.
any other questions, additions? If not, a motion would be in order to approve those
I'll
two.
make a motion to approve the minutes from January 17th and February 21st.
Okay, motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion's been made by Greg, seconded by Don to approve the minutes of the January 17th, 2024 meeting and the February 21st, 2024 meeting. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Okay, motion carried. Next item is our petitions, proclamations, suggestions, or complaints from citizens, committee members, or staff. Does anybody have anything they would like to bring up?
Quiet this time.
I do have one thing. I was approached by somebody yesterday and again today who was at the recreation center, and they were concerned about the ice, that there was a spot when these were people, hockey people, that were concerned about safety and concerned about the impression that our rink is leaving to the community. It's leaving apparently a bad taste. And one of those people were from out of town and said that they don't want to come here any longer. They'd rather go other places. The other was somebody from here. So I thought they knew I was on the Park and Rec Committee, and so I said I'd bring it up.
So poorly maintained is the point.
Yes. Apparently, they explained it to me that there was water that they actually stopped play at once because they didn't know if there was enough ice. Apparently, a compressor or something is not functioning properly, as I was told.
And I've heard similar things, being that my 12-year-old plays in the CCHA Hockey Association. So it is a problem. And I don't know if you have anything to add on, or if we need to go through or have it on a future agenda item of how that's all managed and the ownership of the rinks versus the city versus the school district, because the school district owns the rinks and maintains the rinks and is responsible for it. So it reflects back on the city, but yet the city is not the owner of the rinks. So I don't know if we need to dig into that more at a future meeting or put it on an agenda to go through the agreements and the different things. It might not hurt for the committee to know kind of what was signed I don't know how many years ago that agreement came into effect, but.
Or if there's any way that we as a body can influence that getting fixed. If maybe staff could, help us help you. I think we could address it, because people are viewing it as the city of Victoria, which that's an issue. it's also an issue because residents of the city of Victoria use it regardless of who's owns it or who's responsible for it. And I would guess maybe the city has influence over getting that fixed or can work towards getting it improved, because at some point in time, somebody's gonna have to fix it or do without it, I would think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can add to that, and I thank you all for bringing up that concern. That is definitely something that's been on our radar as well, and we frequently talk to the ice rink manager over what was going on with the condenser. Just for some background, just a little behind the scenes on what is actually happening. It's on East Rink, so we have two rinks at the Victoria Recreation Center. It's the one that's closer to the entrance. It is the older rink of the two that we have. What happened is there's two condensers underneath the ice in the back area that you don't see, but they're running pretty much 24/7 to keep the ice cold. One of those condensers a couple of months ago started to have issues. They had it repaired and then it fully stopped functioning month or so ago, maybe a little bit more at this time. The school district is working with a company to have a temporary condenser being put out there for the summer and fall months, hoping that will at least give them some reprieve until they're able to make some final decisions on getting the condenser replaced, and they're working through that right now. But talked about the question related to what can we do when it comes to the Victoria Recreation Center, having more of an idea of what the future looks like for that space. I think our new business item, 6.1, will help us a little bit talk about some of those things. And then to the committee's point about getting a better understanding of the Victoria Recreation Center. I think last meeting or 2 meetings ago, we talked about how can we beef up our orientation process. That will happen in April. I think that's another thing that we can add to the list is what is the Victoria Recreation Center? How does it function as a facility? Who manages what? How is it managed? And just give us a little 101, even if it is a refresher over that space.
Okay, sounds good. Any other things to bring up in this section? If not, we will move to city news and upcoming events.
I just have a few things for you, committee. The first one is the director position update. I've been here for a couple of months now, and I just want to make sure that you all are informed of what's going on with the Parks and Recreation director position. So that position is open. It is open until the end of this month, and then we'll be looking at doing interviews probably the beginning of April or so. So hopefully we'll have somebody onboarded maybe by your May meeting. And then the second item for you is look in your mailboxes for the spring and summer brochure that is just being finalized, and hopefully will get to the mail to you soon. So we do send that out to every single resident of Victoria, whether you have a Victoria zip code or Excelsior or Chaska. We make sure we get within all of city boundaries, and then obviously we'll have copies here at the Victoria Recreation Center. We'll keep extra copies at the post office and a couple of other strategic locations too.
Okay. Thanks, Alyssa. Old business, we want to consider the location options for a potential Gaga ball pit. And I think some information was sent out or is in the agenda. You want to take that, Alyssa?
You bet. Thank you, Chair. So for the members that were here last month, this is going to look very familiar to you, so I'm just going to quickly go through some of this. But we did have a Boy Scout come in at our last meeting in February, and he presented an Eagle Scout project to us. He is interested in putting a Gaga ball pit somewhere in our Victoria Park system. As city staff, we're very appreciative of the idea. We think it would be wonderful to provide a new amenity within our park space, and Gaga ball happens to be quite popular within that not quite teenage or older kids group that we have such a hard time reaching. The other thing about Gaga ball is that it is ageless, so you have a ton of different people that are playing the sport. It is quite accessible for a lot of different individuals, so it happens to be something that brings the community together and happens to fit for all community members. So this is something that at the last meeting, the committee did say would be a great amenity to have. We're working with Connor, who's the Eagle, or the Boy Scout, to get through some of the questions about material, what our potential grounding material will be, just some of those minor things that he brought up at the last meeting, and as well as cost. But one thing we did put on hold until we had a full committee here is the location of the Gaga Ball Pit. So we proposed 2 locations at the last meeting. One was at Rhapsody Park. The other was at Laketown Park. The reason for both these locations is they happen to be a larger community park. They have a number of amenities in there. They tend to have good parking, which is also something that we're looking for if we're bringing a unique amenity to our park system. And then there's also things that draw people. So we do have T-ball, as well as coach pitch at Rhapsody in Laketown, as well as soccer at Laketown. So you might have siblings, parents that are watching, cousins that are already at the park, and this is an amenity for them to do while their sibling or whoever is playing a ball. So since that time, we have had several conversations with Victoria Elementary. Victoria Elementary is located adjacent to Laketown Park, and they informed us just recently that they are also working with a Boy Scout who wants to do a similar project of bringing a Gaga Ball Pit to Victoria Elementary School playground, which is almost connected to Laketown playground. So since that time, staff recommend removing that as an option and moving forward with Laketown, or with Rhapsody Park.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Alyssa?
One, you mentioned at the last meeting there is some dollars set aside, or we have dollars available to support the project.
That's a great
Do you
question.
have a sense of, if, I know that part of the project is for him to fundraise and do some things, so is it 50%? Like, what's the recommendation for city support towards the project versus outside fundraising by the Scout?
We've talked to Connor briefly about that. He's looking to do 100% of the fundraising. The part that the city would contribute would be the grounding material. If it's wood chips or P-rock, we already have that widely available, and we'd like it to stay within the city standards, so we would provide that piece.
Okay.
All right, good question. Any other questions for Alyssa? If not, would somebody like to make a motion?
Oh, Alyssa, but staff has not determined, like, looking at this, where in this park this Gaga Ball Pit is going to be placed yet. Is that accurate?
We have not.
Okay.
We would look based on, and if we get to the point where the committee agrees that Rhapsody Park would be the best location, we'd work with our maintenance team to really determine, based on mowing and other things that they already do with the park, where would be the best location, as well as usage. We don't want it tucked into a space that's going to cause problems based on what else is around it. But if we can find a spot that happens to be centrally located, but also fine for maintenance, that would be our most ideal spot.
So do we need a motion for this, or
We do not need a motion for it.
so you're just gonna move ahead with it?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Anything else? All right, we will move on then. And that is to new business. Consider options for the 2024 Park and Rec Committee work plan. I'll turn it over to you, Alyssa.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So just for some background, City Council asks each of its advisory committees to establish a work plan that it works on, whether it's activities or projects or what have you, and have that presented to City Council each year. If you remember our past conversations about committee work plans, some things that we've talked about is creating some sort of timeline structure, providing some sort of goals within them, and that's what we're proposing here today. But part of that is within the last couple of months or so, early January, maybe some in December, We've had individual meetings with many of you, myself, as well as City Manager Dana Hardy, about what does the future of the committee look like and what could the possibility of a future work plan or just even committee structure look like in general. So we've taken all those comments, all of those meetings, and tried to summarize it into one document. Obviously, it's short bullet points if you looked at the agenda report, but we did try and summarize what we talked about and hope to present you with a work plan we could find acceptable for 2024. So I'll present that this evening as well as the focus areas, but know that this is the committee's work plan as well as council's work plan. So it is really meant to be a discussion here. If there's things we want to change, if there's items that we think we should address, if the timeline doesn't quite make sense. That's what we're here for today. So make sure that you're communicating and talking. This is supposed to be more of a dialogue rather than me presenting staff's opinion. So just want to put that disclaimer up there first. So based on those conversations, we did identify 4 different focus areas for the committee for 2024. And then obviously these will really change once we look into future years as well, because these are setting the frameworks and the foundation for the committee's focus for more in future years. So the 4 we have are public engagement for park projects, the west and south growth areas, moments of delight, and the Victoria Recreation Center. So the engagement for park projects, focus area 1, is really asking the question, how do we determine amenities in our parks based on the community's needs? One of the key areas that we heard in the meetings was to be ambassadors to the community, to really get out and meet with the community, hear what they have to say, whether that's through a survey or community meetings or what have you, really be the foot on the ground, boots on the ground for the city to make sure that whatever we put in our parks, what actually makes sense for the neighborhood, for the community. So what we would like to do is have this committee first review the process for how we currently do public engagement for parks and determine and recommend new processes. What does it look like for us for public engagement for new development parks? We have quite a few new developments that are coming on the south side. How do we want to interact and get public input of what goes into those spaces? And then the same goes for what I'm calling remodeled parks. If we have a playground that is in need of replacement, instead of putting a playground there, what do we want to do to engage the community of what should go in that space? Maybe it is a new playground, maybe it's something else, but we should definitely be asking those questions. The second focus area is west and south growth areas. And the question that we're asking here is how to ensure.
Can I ask a
Yes,
question?
you bet.
So when you say like, put a process in place, are you looking at us to like go out and find best practices on like, and like write these processes down in like a park and rec manual type thing? Like what, because it says, timeline spring 2024. So what is the actual like to-do item? Like that it's like, okay, if we've done this, we're successful.
That's a great question, and we can talk more about each one of these. Feel free to ask questions on each one of these as we go through them. So for something like this, I think we have more of a workshop discussion where we get maybe off of the dais, we sit down at the tables and talk about, this is what we've done, this is what other communities do, here are some ideas, and let's talk about what our processes want to be. So I think it's more of a back and forth conversation of what fits best for our community. Where do we think that Victoria residents want to be engaged on those? We couldn't pull best practices on those things. There's a lot related to the national and state level about how people have engaged their community in this, but I think we can also do things different and make it our own.
Okay, because it kind of brings to mind we had a remodeling project discussion about Deer Run, for example. So I know there was discussion around when that park is remodeled, do we want to put a mini golf in there? But then the question we had was like, oh, well, did the neighbors request this? So
I don't know right now, just using that as an example, like where that park is in this process.
Yeah, and I think that's for us to determine, but
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I guess I read this as that staff is suggesting from the input that they received from all of us that participated, that this body sits down and learns what possibilities there are, and we set our own process. So there isn't, so we don't end up in a situation like we did with Deer Run, as like who's on first, or what happened first, or that we define the process. So I don't see this being, this isn't specific to Deer Run Park or any other park. It's in general, how do we want to function in the future? And that doesn't mean that we can't revisit the Deer Run Park issue, but I see this as developing something new that we agree on.
I like that you've differentiated between the process for new development versus the remodeling, because the new development's a bit of a challenge because there's no homes there yet. But yet, we saw the sketch plat of the one, and they talked about the style of home that's gonna be there, if it's higher density versus lower density, the price points, things like that can kind of help us determine. But I do like that it's differentiated, because in a new development it's hard, you don't exactly know what's gonna be there. But the remodeling, you can certainly tell what's around it, maybe what would get utilized.
I do have an observation to share, kind of getting back to the Deer Run discussion. You know, the playground equipment there was ordered without input and without this committee's input and without neighborhood input. That was a process that had been in place when, Anne had been in her role as Parks and Director. So that certainly was a disappointment for me. My observation is that when our new Parks and Director is hired and in place, that will be part of that dialogue, I think, with that seat filled. I would hope it would be. Because as if playground equipment is replaced only every 30 years, certainly the needs of the neighborhood may change in that time.
Yeah, good point, and I think that message has been received by staff, and that's, I think, one reason that this is here, so we're clear going forward what that process is and should be, and then we can always refer back, here's what our policy is, because I don't think it was kind of unwritten before. It was, and I thought it worked well, what we had, and we kind of got away from it. This we'll formalize the process with everybody's input, so.
So you are picturing this being like a written down process that,
A policy of the committee is this is what we do when, this is the responsibility of staff, this is the responsibility of the committee, this is the process. That's how I view it. I don't know, Alyssa, if that's how staff views it or not, but I think it can be what we want it to be. So we should all have input into it. And I think it may improve upon the process we had before. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's totally different. I don't know. We haven't had the discussion yet, so.
Yeah.
Anything else on that?
The one thing I would say that, as we talk about public engagement, one of the most beneficial things that has been shared, at least for me, is that what other activities are happening at that park. Because as a father of 3, going to a soccer game for my oldest, when I have a 4-year-old who wants to do something, there's nothing to do at that park, but all the soccer is at the park where there's no playground, was like, so now we're like herding this little kid around and there's nothing to do, right? And if there was a playground there, it would have been, I could have been over there with her and watching the game. And like, I think things like that are important to take into consideration as a part of this, is like, what's being held at the park? So are there t-ball, baseball, soccer, and then what do the other siblings do? Because that's, as a parent hauling these kids around all this stuff, it's super nice to have things for the siblings to do because frankly, they don't want to watch their sister play soccer. Like, let's just be honest. Like, so I would include that in this kind of engagement for parks is like what clubs and organizations are there, what amenities do they need to better facilitate the activities that are happening there, whether it's equipment storage or if it's, you know, whatever it may be. I think that's an important part of it.
Okay,
All right, focus area number 2, west and south growth areas. So we're the city of Lakes and Parks, and we want to ensure that for all of our future development. So this is really looking at some areas that we haven't quite hit yet, or touched, or developed, or annexed, but we know we will, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but years down in the future. And we want to ensure that our parks, our open spaces, our natural amenities are at the top of the list when development does come knocking. So this is going to be one of our longer projects, and it's going to kind of go hand in hand with our comprehensive plan and with our planning team on just really defining what our park needs are for the growth areas, looking at those maps, identifying what are some core areas. We talk a lot about waterways, providing water access. Pearson is within this area, so making sure we're labeling that we want to have some sort of public access, whether it's a beach or whatever have you in this area. That's just one example, but there's tons of wetland, tons of forestry. So we'll want to make sure that we're really looking at those with a park lens, and just really starting to think about those areas before it's too late. So that one's a little bit more gray, kind of more up in the air, but I think this will be a real big project for us moving in the next couple of years or so.
I see this as being similar to the Wasserman Lake Preserve project, as that was brought up years ago when somebody, and apparently the group went through this type of process and identified that. And it's important to identify it early enough before that property's all acquired, and or even have that discussion so when a developer is going to buy it, or perhaps there's tax savings by the people that sell the property to the developer by donating some of it to a public entity, which is hopefully the city, so we could have space for a park that would benefit. And then what goes in it, as we talked about earlier. I think it's a good thing to have on here.
Yeah. This one makes me the most excited, actually, just kind of that forward thinking, you know, what does that space on the southwest location, what does that look like? If we could draw up what's missing in our park system, what would that be? So that we can start thinking about those amenities and protecting the green space. So I'm really excited about this focus area.
Okay.
All right. Focus area 3 is called Moments of Delight, and I know this one sounds a little weird, so stick with me in a moment. We'll kind of go through it. So one of the comments we received in our survey was that we have a ton of park space, we have a ton of open space, but some of it feels a little underutilized. So this one really goes into, obviously the last one was our future park area, but we still have a ton of parkland. So this one really goes into what do we currently have and how do we best utilize it? What are some areas outside of the park, you know, the 5 by 5, whatever, the 5-acre park square, that we can provide some sort of recreational activities, interactive activities, some places to interact with nature, amenities alongside our outlots, alongside of our trails. We have a lot of open space in this community. So how do we make sure that people are still feeling like they're within the City of Lakes and Parks, that they're still able to connect with recreation and culture and our natural amenities without being in a physical park square? So that is really going to be the primary focus of this target, and the committee, if this is something you'd be interested in, is identifying some of those areas that we have. That could even be venturing out on maybe during warmer days, but on your own, and looking at, you know, some areas in your neighborhood that, you know, you might walk by a million times, but you never thought about it in the sense of, oh, you could put an interactive sign here that gets into why this woodland is the way it is and what kind of trees are in this wood forest area, or this is type of native grasses that are in that space. And I'm just enabling a few, but there's a lot of different opportunities for us. And then, let's create a plan of here are some areas that are a little bit underutilized, and what do we want to put in those spaces? And that would work with our parks team, our park maintenance team, as well as our communications team, on really bringing this all together. So.
I think I recognize that park you got a picture of there. Is that Goodman Park?
It is Goodman Park. Good eye.
I
Yes.
walk past it all the time, saying, wonder what we're gonna use this for. Okay.
And that's why I put this as an example, is if you've been to this park, it is just a lot. But if you go there during the summer times, the neighbors put picnic tables out there. There's a lot of bird watching that goes in that space. So it might not seem like a park with all these play amenities in it, but it is still utilized as some sort of park. So maybe instead of just not having things there, having an identification sign that this is a park, and maybe saying, hey, there's bird watching here. Here's some birds to look out for, and just make it more of that connection point for residents. So. And then the last one is the Victoria Recreation Center. And the big question here is just really what the future of the Recreation Center will be. As we talked about earlier, we are in a partnership agreement with the school district, Eastern Carver County School District, for managing and use of that space, specifically the ice arena space. But that agreement will go away in 2032, and we aren't quite sure exactly what's going to happen in 2032, if they're going to renew, if a new agreement will happen, if they're just going to rent the facility, or they're going to walk out completely. But we want to be prepared for all those options, and we also want to understand, where do we want this recreation center to be? We currently have certain amenities. We've been utilizing it probably the same since 2002, so we just want to make sure that we're prepared. For 2032, we can start putting money away if we want to include additional amenities, if we have to do things to the ice arena that we didn't anticipate to. Just really take a deep dive into what is the future of this space. Maybe it becomes more of a community center and we have wood shop classes or wood shop areas or art classes or cooking locations, or we identify that fitness is really what the core focus is on, and then we remodel the fitness area. It could go in a million different directions, but we got to start planning now, because 8 years is going to come really, really fast. So some of the goals that we talked about through this item is really on that community engagement piece. So the committee hosting an open house to gather input. That can be a community open house. Developing some idea of who our key stakeholders are. I put in city recreation center staff as well as school district staff. They utilize the space, they hear people's thoughts. Our fitness trainers, maybe some of our group fitness instructors, those would be good people to communicate and hear what their thoughts are related to the recreation center. Obviously, I think you guys will be key, and this goes into the first focus area too, is when we do public engagement, have you be the people doing the analysis afterwards. What does this actually mean? And how do we make recommendations to council from there? So I think that will be really key, because what will happen eventually down the line is city council will host an all-day, a half-day workshop related to the future of this space, and they'll go through all the data. I think that would be a great opportunity for this committee to participate in that workshop as well, and say, this is what we heard from the community, here's the data that staff has collected regarding the use of this space, and then let's have a conversation over what should this space be. And that might be one conversation, it might be more than that, just depending on how much we're feeling about it, because it's a big building and it means it's going to be a big project for us to determine that.
Questions on this, or maybe another question I would have is, what's missing? I mean, what is there a focus area that somebody thinks that this group should focus in on that isn't brought up here?
I do have a quick question on this area 4. Will this be like a staged approach, or is it going to be looked at in a whole with a 2032 relaunch date, so to speak?
I think it would be a staged approach. I think it really determines, however, on what is determined based on what we hear from the community. If we hear from the community that they're looking for something right now, then obviously council will have to make the decision if they want to put the investment in to do it right now, or if it's something they want to wait and pay for down the line. Or might not be in 8 years, but it might be in 2 years. Then in 5 years, they do something, and then in 8 years, just to make those improvements, anticipating that full-on launch, that complete rebrand will happen in 2032. So it could go in a lot of different directions there, but.
I guess I had one question. As I looked at this as a planning process, the one thing that I don't see on here is what's the vision? We're coming up with focus, we're coming up with strategies, but what are we trying to accomplish? What are we, and maybe that exists someplace, maybe the city council has that or whatever, but I think it would be helpful if we define, the vision for our parks, and, these are pieces of things that would fit into that, but I think sometimes if you start here, this is what you're trying to accomplish, and your focus areas are all driven to move towards that. And I think if you don't have that, then you're going here and you're going there, costs more, we don't get things accomplished, we do the wrong things, we get off track because we don't see what that vision is. So can we come up with first of all, I'll ask the question, is there a vision for our parks and rec?
Yeah, the quick answer, no, but also yes. So our master plan was sunset in 2020. It started in 2005. It was a 15-year plan, and that was our primary focus. This is the key picture. This is what we're going to go for. This is our mission. This is our vision. Council did determine in the budget process last go around that they would like not to move forward with the master plan this year, but what they would like to do instead, since we're going to start working on the 2050 comprehensive plan, since we're working with similar focus groups, similar companies to get the project done, similar consultants, that it would make most sense to have the Parks Master Plan be part of the comprehensive plan process. So at this time, no, that process will start in the next year or so, maybe 2 years is when we'll kickstart that, and that will get into that larger discussion of what is our park system plan going to be for the next 15 plus years.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, to me, a vision, a vision drives the plan. If you have the plan you have to know what the vision is before you know what you want to accomplish. Let me use an example. And usually a vision is something that, in an ideal state, this is what you'd want to see, that our parks are a community gathering place, or our public spaces are community gathering spaces that allow our community to engage with each other, whatever it is. Some broad statement that, to me, if you don't have that, again, it's hard to, you can go in all different directions, and there's stops and starts. And I think if we had a vision, and when you had part of a plan, we could say, does this plan lead us towards our vision? And if it doesn't, that's your first question. If it doesn't, then you don't do it. And if it does, then that's the first, okay, now it does. Now, how specifically, what steps do we need to take to make it happen? What hurdles do we have to take? How much is it going to cost? So I just think that's missing from this, and I'm just suggesting that it might be helpful to have it. And I'm not suggesting that it's probably something the city as a whole has the vision, and maybe that's included in the 2020 plan or whatever that does currently exist, and we don't need the vision for Parks and Rec needs to be in concert with that for the city as a whole. We can't go off on our, recommend to the council go off in a separate direction, but I think it would be helpful for us long-term to have a vision. I don't know if people agree or disagree, but.
I completely agree. Suggestion.
And I see nothing wrong with these things that we have, but I just see that we might benefit from developing that vision of what we're trying to accomplish here. One other thing that I don't see on here, and I know we've talked a lot about, and it's not as exciting as the things that we have here, but I think it's important. And that's how do we assure that the things that we have now are maintained, that reflect well in the community, preserve the assets that we do have so they last longer, that they remain safe. And I'm not talking about we need to get into details of that, but I think those are some of the things that some of us have brought up. I think that came up in some of the discussions probably, that I know when I had a discussion, I brought it up. That might be a focus area of, again, not that the committee does the maintenance or needs to see individual reports, but there's some assurance that processes in place to make sure things are maintained.
Larry, there's one more thing that I would add. In addition to, again, this focus plan is talking about the rec center, about new parks, and developing your existing parks. A key area that this group has focused on over the past few years has been trail gaps. And having trails ensures that people have a means of experiencing all of the city in a safe manner. And I would hope that work could continue.
Yeah, do you see trail gaps as being in one of these focus areas? Because it's not specifically called out.
It is not, and I think it's always going to be a focus area for this committee. That's kind of been the process, is annually just always double checking our priority list to ensure that we're not missing anything, that there's not something that we haven't missed, or if there's a priority that should go higher to the top versus where it was previously. So I think that work will continue as part of the annual process. And that's something we'll do, or at least we'll start doing through the annual orientation, is really start talking about our trail gaps again and where they are. But part of that document is that we do bring it to City Council, they review, they assess, and then they make their budget determinations. It's more of a guiding document for them rather than a working document for us.
I agree that's probably a topic that we need to stay on top of, because that's usually the number one thing that we hear from the community. And I know one of the things that we've talked about in the past is, well, how do we get these done? Because and a lot of times there's, multiple hurdles, or I think sometimes they're viewed as barriers. And at some point in time, it would be nice to be able to say, if this is important, how do we get it done, instead of why can't we get it done? To strive to accomplish one of those things. And I know it's difficult, but I don't think we want to keep beating a dead horse all the time too. If it's not feasible to do it, we should just take it off the list and say, but if it is feasible, then we need to figure out how to get it done.
Well, it's just interesting because, I'd almost, if this is going to be our working document and people are going to see this, taking our discussion out of this, if people are looking this, they're going to say, well, we responded to that survey and we said in the next 5 years, we'd like you guys to focus on trail gaps. So then if I was on the other side of the table and not seeing trail gaps here, I'd be like, well, what is the committee working on? They're not listening to our survey. And same with it's not specifically called out here, so I just don't know where it fits in. Was that all the amenities that people said that they would like us to consider to be constructed or developed? We talked about, we called it water, but they said number 1 was pools, number 2 was trails, 3 was beaches, 4 was indoor pool, and 5 was splash pad. So, I I know this is supposed to be for us, but I kind of like to see some more specifics in there to let people know, like, okay, we heard you on this survey. You know, if the vision is in the next 5-year focus, we're gonna find you some water amenities. Well, then let's have that specifically called out so people know that we heard them and are working on what they asked for. And the trail gaps, again, beat a dead horse, but 43.8% in that survey said, in the next 5 years, please focus on the trail gaps. So like, I just see some of this as fluff versus like, okay, if they want trail gaps, then we can't do some of these other things, or we need to find the money or keep keep bringing it up because that's what people are saying. So
Would you see some of those specific items going into these categories? Is that like some of these
With trails,
trail gaps or water features?
Water access, yeah.
water access will be a key component to that second gap, or to that second focus area. Because we know that if we're going to find those water access, it's most likely going to be in that west or south growth area. The additional piece is if there's opportunity to expand the recreation center, that will come into that too. I think it all kind of gets into those pieces together. We don't know until we have had those conversations of where this leads us.
So are you looking for us to help build these out with more specifics, like Amanda is suggesting?
I think we can definitely build out the communication pieces and talk more about what the survey specifically said and how we're going to reach those goals. The trail gaps piece, to go back to that, council does really look for that to be their guiding document, not our working document. So what they like to see is us review it, make sure that those priorities are still priorities, that we're not missing anything. So then when they're having conversations on a larger level, when they're looking at where they're putting their dollars towards, when they're having conversations with the county about transportation projects, that they're keeping those connectivity points in mind and at the top level. So I don't see that coming to be a focus area on its own.
I wonder if, two things. One is, I think the water feature, I would call that out in our focus area too. I mean, even though it's gonna come up, I think Amanda brings up a good point. If community participate in a survey and they see our focus groups and they don't see water mentioned, they're gonna say, why did I waste my time filling out this? And, you know, we may determine through the discussion on this that it does or it doesn't make sense, but we do need to address it. So I think if you, in the potential steps or goals, and I know we're gonna flush this out more at future meetings, so it'll probably come up, but maybe make sure that we at least mention that in this focus area too. And I do think it would be wise to also, even though we're just coming up with a list, if that's what the council wants us to do on trail gaps, I do think it would be important to include trail gaps someplace in here. I don't know where it fits, but
Number
in
one.
focus one, it
Yeah.
says, just to let people know, like, yes, we heard you.
We heard you, yeah.
We're not not addressing it.
can you go back to focus area one, Alyssa, please?
And I feel like from me listening to the conversation, I think it would maybe fit better in focus area 3 with those underutilized spaces and calling the trail gaps out as part of that conversation.
Yeah, that's fine, where it fits best, but I do think it should be, I think it's a good point that was raised here that we would be missing if we don't go in there. And again, it's something that needs to stay in the forefront, and even though it may not be the major focus of a work plan, it is something that we don't want to have fall off the table either.
Can you go to 3 then again, so we can just see that for us?
I think you could maybe just say, how do we improve our entire park system, including trails and underutilized spaces, and you got it covered.
Oh, yeah, that's a good spot for it.
Trails, water, underutilized.
Yeah. So are we gonna, at our next meeting, or next meetings, take these individual items and come with a specific work plan?
Yeah, like, do we have homework?
You do not have homework tonight.
So that we can.
If this is something, these 4 areas would be something the committee agrees, and I'm seeing head nods, and I've seen head nods throughout the presentation, but just wanting to confirm that these are the 4 focus areas we're all comfortable with. And then we'll do on a staff side is really start flushing these out, developing them, and then bring them back for our next committee meeting to take another look at and make sure that we're still on the same page if there's anything we want to adjust or change or whatever have you.
So if I'm, first of all, any other comments? So what I heard is that I think there's a general consensus that we're okay with these areas to, flesh out further with the addition of, adding something in the focus document about water amenities and trails. Is that right? Okay, I hear people, see people.
Oh, yeah, and you said maintenance.
Oh, yeah, maintenance.
Or maintaining what we do have.
If we, find where maybe that fits in, because that's kind of a biggie. I guess I would, and I'm still gonna make a pitch for a vision. And maybe we could have that as one of our next meetings. I mean, if there isn't one, let's have one. And, it's not up to us to determine that, but I think we could recommend to the council that this is something that we see would be a vision. Yes, Alyssa?
Yes, I was trying to pull it up. Sorry if I seemed a bit distracted by the computer, but council does have 3 guiding principles that they go by for its park system, and that's what I was trying to pull up. What I will have for you for our next meeting is I will have those guiding principles attached to the agenda report, so you can have those in front of you while you're looking at these focus areas.
That would be helpful.
And then for the maintenance piece, just to get some clarification from the committee, what would you specifically like to see for that as an action plan for a focus? Is there things that you would like to do specifically for that?
I think the rec center is going to become a big part of that, especially with the hockey rink thing. It's just, you brought it up, I've brought it up. It's going to continue to be an issue, I think, between now and the end of that agreement. And then what's going to happen with those facilities is going to be a big part of the maintenance and upkeep and things. But also, as the city continues to expand, we can't neglect the parks we currently have because we have a shiny new object over here. Like, I don't know how you put that into nicer language than that, but we need to make sure there's money set aside, budget set aside, so that all the resources aren't just going into the new
park.
An annual this may already be happening, but just an annual assessment of, here's where the park equipment is, here's where the park grounds are, here's where Greg brought up the rec center. Here are all the things, and we need to address. I'm guessing somebody's doing that, but it might be nice to have a review of that. Again, I don't want to, in the past, what we had would be a report of, here's replacement, here, in general, here's when items need to be replaced. And it would be nice to have an overall plan like that. Not that the staff does it, but it'd be nice for this group to review it, to know there is one. And then I think we could assist the city council with recognizing that before we spend, X number of dollars on new shiny object A, we should ask, how are we going to maintain that? And is that more important than maintaining some of the other things? It's where are the dollars going? Are they all going to new items? That wouldn't necessarily be going good. Are they all going to old items to maintain them? That wouldn't necessarily be good. Where's the balance? So,
I'll tell you a little bit about our budget process, because we do maintenance on a day-to-day level. We have park staff that we just recently brought on. We switched some of our Public Works general staff to dedicated parks within the last year. So we are continuously looking at our maintenance. They're doing an annual or a monthly assessment of our playgrounds, and then we hire seasonals that do weekly assessments of our park spaces. We tend to like to keep that as a staff level, since we're at the day-to-day, and doing those regular reports get a little nitty-gritty and almost rubber stamping from the committee. What we also do when it comes to new parks versus are we maintaining our old parks is it's more of that council policy level. If this committee recommends that a new park should go into this new development, that our budget aligns with that. So when it comes into that next cycle, we're not just saying we're not taking care of DTELM anymore, that we're taking care of DTELM and we added this new park, so now we're gonna put the maintenance money into making sure that both parks are within that. So it seems we tend to do that on a staff level already, and we're making more progress to make sure that things don't get left on the back burner.
and I'm fine with that if that's how it's defined as a staff function and the staff's gonna do it. But I want to make sure that we're fulfilling our responsibility to the council, who I know the council has expressed concern about maintenance of parks. And I don't want them looking at us and saying we shirked our responsibility and we aren't paying attention to that. And I think that also came up in the survey, that maintenance was important. So if that's a staff function and the staff takes responsibility for it, I have no problem with that, but let's define it as such. And then, we'll bring up the complaints and things we hear, so you're aware of them. But we won't feel an obligation to have this group focus on it. But I think we need to make that clear. And I think it is an issue that, we need to make sure that it's addressed, so.
Sounds good.
Anything else? Okay. No action other than the discussion we had. I think we had a pretty good discussion about different things, and I assume that the next meetings we'll be going into more detailed kind of workshop-like to talk through some of these and come up with some specific thoughts and ideas and goals. Okay, anything else? Okay, if not, motion would be in order to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Before we vote on that, I think this is Don's last meeting. Is that correct? Yeah. So I'd like to thank you, Don, for your participation and being a member of our committee and helping us move forward with our park and rec programs here in the community. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Okay. A motion's on the floor to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion's carried and we're adjourned.
Anyway.